Good afternoon and welcome to the Firaxis Livestream. My name is Pete Murray, in for Sarah Darney. Sarah has been given a wonderful opportunity in Timbuktu with a upcoming ruler that we are ready to talk about today. Joining me today to talk about Mali is Dennis Shirk, lead producer of Sid Meier's Civilization 6, and Brian Felges, one of the gameplay designers. Guys, thank you for coming and talking about gold today. So today we get to talk about Mali, and what does Mali have in store for players who are going to be playing Gathering Storm?
Gold.
Gold?
And gold.
Gold
Faith
and faith.
gold.
Yeah.
There are two things that make Mali work.
So
and they do it very, very, very well.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to be playing a little bit of Mali today. So Carl is back. He's going to be warmongering it up and money-mongering it up as well, too. And just as a reminder, Gathering Storm is going to be out on February 14th, 2019, just about a month away at this point, which is pretty exciting for us. So thank you for tuning in. If you have questions in our Twitch chat, we have a special room called Questions for the Devs. We'll keep an eye on it, and if we can answer your question, we'll do our best to do so. We do have just one save to share with you today, but it'll give you a good sample of what Mali's abilities are. So I hope you guys are going to enjoy that. So let's, should we just jump in, or do you guys want to go over a little bit of the background for Mali?
Let's go ahead and jump in.
Yeah.
Let's dive right into it.
Okay. So Mali, Matzah Musa was in Civilization 4. Mali in that game was kind of a powerhouse money civ too, but they've got a new suite of abilities for this time around.
Yes.
Yeah, it's much more integrated with the way that Civilization 6 plays. I mean, it always wants you to be interacting with the environment much more than you have in previous civs, and they do that in spades. So they love the desert. A couple of the things that they have going for them, as you can see, everybody who's already seen the text or the video early when we announced, their ability is pretty amazing. The first ability, which is trade routes, getting extra gold from your flat desert tiles, is really powerful. You can rack up a lot of gold early. If you get a golden age, you get extra trade routes that further crank that up. And the reason that they can survive and thrive so well in desert is because their city center actually gets bonuses for food and faith by settling in the desert. So all of that space that normally is completely unsettled and empty, that's just your playground going forward.
It's yours for the taking, which is nice because when you're snatching up that land, you're kind of grabbing land that is normally unappealing to most civs.
Yeah.
There's also some other adjacency bonuses in there that really shake things up. But yeah, Ed really had his eyes on getting the environment to work with this civ a lot, and it's a lot of fun.
And also with the Mali, you're looking for all the hills. Because, your mines don't do quite the same thing as anybody else's mines. Your mines are vomiting gold when you put them up. So you're getting 4 gold per mine, you're getting a slight -1 production hit, but you're just generating a lot of gold. But that brings us around to one of the bits that everybody's talking about online since we announced the Mali, is that they take a 30% production penalty on units and buildings.
Yes.
And there's a reason for that, because they want you to play this differently, and you're generating a lot of gold. And the possibility is there, well, I would say there's just about no ceiling. I came into our practice yesterday thinking, I'm getting almost 300 gold per turn in my save, and I'm awesome because of it as the Mali. And Carl's like, I'm sorry, guys, I'm only getting 400 gold per save. Normally I'm doing about 1,000 with the Mali. I'm really sorry. And I'm like, oh, man. Made me feel awful. But that just, it drives home the point that you have an extreme amount of flexibility with the Mali to how you play. So I don't have to have a standing army because I know that I can make one appear at the time. If you get invaded, which I had in the one game I played yesterday, I had Barbarossa off to my north, and he invaded me about 4 times over the course of the game. And every single time he did, I would basically make an army.
He tried and failed.
Yes, tried and failed. Because you have that flexibility with that amount of gold. If I'm playing a more traditional game, similar to what Carl's playing here, I'm playing that faith and that gold purchasing game. I'm teching up a lot. I'm playing the religion game pretty effectively, especially if I'm doing things like combining my faith game with desert folklore, because obviously if you can have desert folklore in play, you're going to be generating gobs of faith to your holy sites. But there's other interesting ways to play with that amount of gold. Pete, you were telling me the other day when you were playing, you took a completely different route to what I typically would play with the Mali.
Yeah, and what's been interesting is when we were doing our practice and watching Carl play, Carl was making choices differently than I was. I almost never pass up Divine Spark because with Mali, with the number of Sugobo, their unique commercial hub that they get, I want to get as many kind of great merchants going up as possible.
Yeah.
And so getting Divine Spark generally makes that easier for me to do. So, when people are like, oh, take Desert Folklore, I'm like, they don't have a problem with religion. Like, you don't need to worry about gathering faith with Mali. So
Yes.
you can kind of tune and focus that a little bit differently. Yeah, I'll tell you my full story of that. There's a question in chat, does the 30% production penalty apply to building civilian units? The answer is yes, it does. But Mali has a lot of tools for getting those workers and those settlers in all sorts of different ways. So while there is a bit of a production penalty for it, and you do kind of have to plan your production on that better.
Yeah, you get into a different mindset when you're playing them. You focus on the things that you try to focus on purchasing the things that you get the production hit, production hit for, but you want to be building the things that you don't. So
like wonders, and because you don't take the production penalty for building wonders.
Yes.
So when Petra finally shows up, you totally want to be aiming for that. That's a huge benefit.
it's a Petra sieve. That's like should you reset the game or reload a save if you lose Petra? I don't know if I'd.
Yeah.
So
No comment.
So we're talking about World Congress today too, and this is a system that I believe you guys have touched on some previous ones.
Yeah, we've touched on it pretty lightly. Now, this is the very first World Congress that came up in Carl's game. The first time you're going to see this is when you enter the medieval era.
Yep.
And that's when you get together, the people that you've met are there, the people that you've not met, obviously you can see in the upper left, are showing up as a question mark. You're not going to be able to see the grievances with them. You're not going to be able to see how much diplomatic favor they have. But this is an example of an early game World Congress session. And we've got a couple different proposals here that are on the plate. They're all going to be relevant to the era that you're playing in. For example, on this one, I'm leaning forward, we have mercenary companies, we've got urban development treaty, but these are really good examples of a plus and a minus, depending how you want to play the game, where you can try to use diplomatic favor to forge the direction of these proposals. So mercenary companies, for example, producing or purchasing military units when using the chosen currency is plus 100% the cost until the next World Congress.
So when we're talking currency type, we're talking production, gold, or faith.
Carl, put one in there so we can actually show
See
that.
the drop
Put
down,
our free vote in there, because you always are able to spend nothing to get a free vote in everything. But for us as Mali, for example, this is an ability for me to troll everybody else in the game, because I know that I'm buying most of my stuff with gold.
Right.
So I can simply try to either plow as much favor as possible into here, not so much in the early game because not many people have as much favor. But later on, I can use the amount of favor that I'm generating or buying or whatever else and stop everybody else or increase their production costs on everything significantly, which is going to help me greatly,
Yeah, because it
especially
doesn't
if I've
hurt.
got warring sieves.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can go both ways, and I think there was kind of an argument there too. It's like, do you play where you're benefiting yourself, making things way cheaper with gold, like he's just selected here, or are you trying to mess with the opposing civs, making everything more expensive for them?
Yes.
And you don't care because you have gold coming out your ears. So,
and we can see urban development treaty down here as well. So Carl has a few different options there that he can work with. So he's got plus 100% production towards buildings in a chosen district. Typically, if this were some other game, I might choose the commercial district to generate more gold, but I can already buy commercial district buildings with faith as the Mali. So we don't necessarily need to do that. So maybe we want to put our eggs in another basket here.
So if you do city center, for example, and you increase the production put towards city center districts, that lets Mali build walls much more easily than they would otherwise.
Yeah.
Which is
a consideration, exactly.
Yeah.
Because you can't buy them. Yeah.
And the AI tends to like this proposal, the 100% production towards buildings, and usually city center seems to be the one that passes. So if this goes through,
It's a popular one, yeah.
Yeah, if it goes through World Congress, this is generally when I like to kind of push to get the walls up on my city. So
now a couple of other things with this screen. This is pretty much the minimum that you'll see. As you progress further into the game, that's when you really see World Congress start to shine.
Yeah.
Because you're going to start seeing special sessions be announced. You're going to start seeing different projects come into play. So later on, you might get the climate accords that you can either vote for or against to compete in that.
Right.
And when you get to a certain area later in the game, the diplomatic victory points will start coming into play as well. So you can earn diplomatic victory points a few ways. You can outright try to vote them for yourself when these start coming up.
Right.
You can earn them from different competitions, like the climate accords, for example. You can get them, I if I remember right, from sending aid and winning aid competitions from other civilizations. So those things all working together really make the whole world game.
Or other ways, as Pete was telling us about. So maybe we'll just go ahead and hop into the game.
Yeah.
You'll go ahead and commit these.
So we commit these, we wait for all of our other civilizations, and then we see what's passed. And then you can expand these to see exactly how the voting broke down to see what people thought. So it looks like it's now more expensive to purchase military units with faith. That was the option chosen by most of the other civilizations in the world. So we kind of lost out on that one, but that's okay. But the Urban Development Treaty passed unanimously, which is good for city center. If somebody had voted, yes, we want to pass this Urban Development Treaty, but we want to focus on another area, say the campus, then it could have, they could have poured all of their kind of diplomatic favor into that, and then that would have made it the outcome from it, despite the rest of us voting on that. When I was playing as Mali this week, I had this really great game where I was buying people's diplomatic favor directly with gold.
Yes.
And in the game I was playing, Saladin and Cyrus were locked in this incredibly long war with each other. And I just kept giving gold to whoever was losing the war, just to prolong it, because it made them more willing to part with their diplomatic favor, which meant I could hoard it all for myself. And then every time the win diplomatic victory vote came up, I could vote for myself. And that was very nice.
Talk about a proxy war, right?
If you can't buy friends, you can certainly buy their respect. So
Yeah, Pete surprised me because it's a very, you think about it like a cynical way to play. He's gonna fund foreign wars. He's gonna use his gold to buy all the diplomatic favor that he can in the game, all to get ahead in the game. It was a very different way of thinking about playing the Mali and really taking advantage of that gold benefit, which I thought was pretty cool.
Hey, Carl, can you take a second and jump back into the production queue real quick for Nayani? I think you had just started to camp us up there. Somebody has asked if we can show off some of the production queue stuff as well too.
Oh, cool.
The production queue is back. There is a new way to organize the things that are coming up in your queue. Dennis, do you want to talk about this a little bit?
Surely. So, for example, go ahead and cram in that watermill and that temple while you're at it. So obviously, aside from the traditional things of reordering, moving things around, deleting or adding to the queue, we've also gone ahead and added a multi-queue if you click on that. And so you can actually zoom around in your different cities, see what everything's working on, move things around.
Get kind of more of an overview of just that city, and so.
It's something that our fans have been asking for a very, very long time. So we're really happy to really get this in play. So all of our options are available right now on the screen. We've actually got shortcut buttons to kind of jump around on the production list when it gets really lengthy later in the game, which is really cool. So I think people are going to be digging this. I know we certainly are already.
Yeah, we love it. I mean, it was a long time coming, but we wanted to make sure we got it right. It was kind of tricky to implement in Civ 6 just because the production panel or the production queue for a city is not as straightforward as it has been in previous incarnations, where a lot of the buildings or districts and things are placed. A lot of things have dependencies, and so.
Touching back real quick, we had a question that the diplomatic victory sounds interesting, but as someone who primarily plays with friends, is this approach viable if it requires other civs to vote or sell you favor? So it's interesting because the reason I was highlighting the way that Pete was playing is because that's not something that we typically go all out to buy that additional favor. It's certainly a currency that flies around in the deal panel, but not required in any specific way. You can generate diplomatic favor through so many different sources. You can generate it by, like I said before, winning scored competitions. You can get it from different government district buildings. There's a lot of different ways to achieve these. And diplomatic victory points come in different ways as well. So that's not necessarily a requirement. So if nobody wants to trade you favor, you're going to have plenty of options to get favor. And that's one of the interesting points, too, about America. We've actually changed their UA in this game. One of the benefits they have as America with favor is the number of wildcard slots they receive. They actually get favor per turn for every wildcard slot that they have.
And that tick builds up very quickly over time, especially with some of that.
And World Congress is especially fun in multiplayer.
Yes.
So you want to get that favor. Yeah, so diplomatic victory, might be difficult when you're playing in like a multiplayer game, but but World Congress is definitely fun in multiplayer, especially with increasing or decreasing certain production types, and being able to mess with your opponents. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, very definitely. So we did talk a little bit about one of the balance changes that is going to be made. Somebody's asking about balance changes to other civilizations. So the change to the Americas, that is a new change that is coming with that as well too. We had some other questions as well. Is the unique market art in the Suguba? Yes, the Suguba has unique art associated with it.
Yeah, thanks,
so you
Carl.
can see some of it. Yeah. Very nice. So that is,
pretty.
yeah.
We had another question earlier too that asked if they have a start bias to desert. That is a definitive yes. If you don't see desert in the start, you'll probably want to re-roll because you're on a planet that somehow didn't generate with desert. Generally, that's the place to be. If your first city is near desert, you definitely want to be there because a lot of your bonuses come from that.
Oh, look, Carl's gone to war with somebody and finally got his peace treaty. That's good for you, Carl. I'm proud of you for not paving the world with your opponents. So there was another question that I saw earlier. Will the new production queue be part of the expansion, or will it be also available to those people who don't buy the expansion?
That is straight back through the base game.
So that's going to go all the way back for everybody who owns Civ 6.
That is part of our patch process.
Yes.
So every time we release an expansion, obviously everything that we do is not just for the expansion. We tend to release things backwards through Rise and Fall, base game, the whole 9 yards.
We like to keep supporting the base game, and any improvements that we feel should have been in there or should be in there, we get them in.
Or just feedback from fans.
Exactly.
In general. So
exactly.
There's a lot of options that we're going to be talking about in the coming weeks too. Obviously touching on the scenarios, but some of the things that are going straight back to the base game, like Hall of Fame, Led by Cloud. Look at the nice Volcanoes.
Another cool example of the new random events that have been added into the game. This is a volcanic eruption.
That's a pretty serious one too.
Yeah, it looks like a catastrophic. No, mega
colossal.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh, and it's cost of population for the city nearby. Nice. Good job. Somebody had asked if Petra affects desert mountain tiles, and you were saying mountains are mountains regardless of where they are, but Petra will not improve the yield.
Technically, there is a terrain type underneath them, but for yield purposes and other purposes, they are mountains, period.
Yep. Do unique units now require strategic resources as well? And I guess somebody who was looking at the panel earlier at the Monte Carlo Cavalry, yes, they do require iron.
That's a recent balance change we made early on in base game Civ. We generally had a policy where we were not requiring strategics for unique units. And there was some thought process behind that, but basically we wanted to make sure that players always had the opportunity to use their unique units. But due to the resource changes that we've made in the latest expansion, we agreed that a lot more units should probably start requiring strategics because we really wanted to bring that gameplay in there with strategics and the need for them, the need to acquire them, the need to, by any means necessary, by trade, by force, however, by acquisition. In true 4X fashion, right?
Active diplomacy.
Yes.
And now what you do is you accumulate a number of resources, and then constructing each one of the unit requires you to have a number of those resources on hand. So the Monte Carlo Cavalry requires 20 iron to build, for example.
Right. It actually, the model shifts slightly because as we've seen in previous streams, but I'll go ahead and reiterate, is that at the beginning of the game, there's just like an upfront cost that you pay. You pay a certain amount of iron, or, for example, to build a swordsman unit or any other unique unit that requires iron. And then later that shifts to a fuel model where you actually are paying like a maintenance cost in, for example, oil or coal. And so it becomes a different dynamic, and it becomes much truer to how resources are used, in a modern situation.
So I got a couple of questions about those strategic resources accumulating. Are they more abundant now? And can you cap the number of resources that you gather?
Those are great questions. We have done some adjustments to the frequency of the resources on the map. So they are more available. But the answer, though, is that because you now acquire resources per turn by improving those plots,
right?
We also introduced what we call resource caps. So there's a cap on how much of a particular resource you can be holding at any given time. Now you can increase that number through building military buildings like the barracks,
the armory,
and the armory, et cetera. Yeah. So that's a way to increase your cap. But yes, we do cap those amounts.
Okay. And then there was another one that I was looking at. If you have the governor, which allows you to buy districts, Is that overpowered with Molly?
That's a great one.
The answer is yes,
The answer is
and it's
yes.
awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're totally going to want to get Reina online like early on
yep.
because buying your districts, like I at one point I want to try a Molly in Space Victory and just have her just go to a new city, establish, buy a spaceport,
Boom,
like,
boom, boom,
move
boom,
on.
boom.
Yep. That's just going to be so. There's Coupe is offering for.
He really
iron and
wants horses and iron. I don't know if it's such a great idea.
I
to
never
give Coupe.
trade iron
And it's
and
very
horse.
specific
Whoa!
amounts of iron and horses, so
Yeah.
he's planning on building something.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. He just looked at that. He's like, I want to build this many swordsmen.
And I guess that's one of the ideas behind the recent resource changes as well, is that we wanted them in a more granular nature so that they could be traded more easily without, being that one kind of monolithic. When before you'd have 1 or 2 iron, you might be less likely to trade away some of that. But as Carl just showed us, he was perfectly fine with giving Coupe some of his horses
on
and
his
iron.
head then.
Exactly.
So let's see.
Another thing that I found was interesting, I don't know if you guys ran into the same thing, Dennis, but like when I'm playing as Molly, like instinctually when I change production or like when you click the, choose production button in the lower right, it always brings up production. And like mentally, I was always like, oh, okay, I want to build this one. And like, I almost wish I could go into the UI and like change a setting or something so it would default to purchasing things, because I always found myself like going into the production panel and then having to go to purchase because you're purchasing things way more than you're like building.
Yes.
Oh, for sure, definitely.
I just, like the first time I played Molly, I had to get my mind, I had to get into that mindset. Took a little bit.
Yeah, a lot of people are asking
usually just don't play
questions about changes to other civs that are coming out for Gathering Storm. Is there anything else that leaps immediately into mind to you?
We've done a full pass on all of these existing civs to make sure that they have different gameplay elements. Especially, I can't go into exact details with that. I would definitely want Ed in the room to go through that because they
I'm afraid I'm
basically-
going to say something.
Yeah, they basically went back through everybody, found people that would actually have a really cool, applicable, real-world tie-in with the stuff that he's doing, and made adjustments. And that's across the board. They did that with governors. They did that with some of the specialists.
Yeah. Egypt has got a few changes associated with it coming down the pike too. That's
Hojo as
pretty
well.
interesting.
There's a few that got adjustments.
Yeah.
I mean, we've also done a fair amount of balance just across the board. Unit balance, we did plenty of that based on a lot of feedback that we got, a lot of feedback from QA, and we feel like we have all that in a nice spot right now. So.
Oh, I did want to mention one of the saddest things about the
Petra.
the strategic resource game.
Yeah, build Petra.
Carl's going for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when I was playing, I had no iron. So I traded for enough iron to make 1 swordsman because I had a barbarian camp down south that was generating swordsmen. He had one show up on my border.
Yeah.
And I used that swordsman. I was very proud of him, used up all my iron to build him. And then I had forgotten that Mr. Swordsman will not heal without the presence of iron. So he just slowly withered away until I suicide attacked him, my final.
But you only need at least 1.
Yes.
So it's not consuming.
I had
It's like
zero.
you had
You
0.
had 0
I
iron.
traded for
So,
13
right,
just
for
to build
13,
that one.
yeah, you should have traded for 14.
I know. I just needed 1 more.
That was.
Yeah, I guess that's a potential trap.
I thought it was actually kind of interesting. There was 1 swordsman left in that unit. That's all. Just 1.
Just the one guy.
He was glorious.
So we have another diplomacy-related question. Do grievances tick down faster if you make friendly overtures like open borders, gifts, or improving relations in general?
Grievances will come down by a set amount. I'd have to go back through the rules to see if there's what other modifiers come into place for grievances. But I'm pretty sure the trickle is based on the state of the game you're in, if you're at war, bigger things like that, not necessarily based on trades.
That's one of those things too that's kind of, we've been going through a lot of balance changes with grievances right now, so it's kind of hard to answer that 100% accurately.
Grievances started as a fairly finite system and grew into this big glorious thing. It's woven everywhere into the game now. You can actually see a couple things. If Carl brings up the World Congress menu, for example, you can actually see on the left you've got a couple civs that you have grievances currently sitting with, and if you go in there into those diplomatic panels, you can actually see what they're from or how long they're going to be taking. So we can actually go to the grievances and see that. And it's interesting because this has become a whole metagame on top of the game based on your activity going back and forth, the promises that you've made and or broken, the wars that you've done, the cities you've conquered and decided to keep for
Right,
yourself.
because we refactored the whole warmongering system to work with grievances.
It comes into play for loyalty too, for cities that you've taken.
Yep.
So grievances with that civilization actually affect the amount of loyalty loss or gain that you get after trying to keep.
And
the
then
cities.
you notice that by telling a leader to buzz off or agreeing with them, that generates a certain amount of either diplomatic favor or grievance with them as well too. Yeah, and then somebody had actually asked if sandstorms are a huge threat to Mali. Yes, absolutely. So
there's a large quantity of sand around Mali.
yeah, and the way the game kind of generates sandstorms and droughts they're sort of mitigated by the amount of woods tiles that are near them, which tend not to be something that you have a lot of when you settle near the desert. So I always feel like with Mali, at least one of my cities is usually a little drier than it should be, or potentially. Although on the game where I paid everybody else to have my proxy wars, there was an area I was going to settle that had a sandstorm sweep through it that actually improved the base tiles like so significantly. By the time I put the city there, it was actually fantastic. So that was really good.
And it's interesting too with the forests that are around Carl's cities. I was joking with him yesterday when he was getting a wonder cranked out that I was like, just start chop them.
Yeah.
But he of course made the valid point that because mines are not a great source of production in Mali, lumber mills coming up later on are extremely beneficial, aside from staving off droughts and things like that you don't want ripping through that.
Right, it's a good source of production when you're already challenged in that area.
So can anyone build wonders or districts on floodplains now?
Yeah, there are limits as to what can and cannot be built on floodplains, of course. But there are wonders that you can build on floodplains.
Yes, definitely. And
Another volcano.
what happens to something which requires a particular resource for upkeep when you run out of that resource, like swordsman? So if you don't have enough of the resource after you build it, it starts to just take damage over time?
It changes it a little. Like Dennis was talking about, it doesn't heal if you have none of, all you have to have is at least one of that resource, and then your unit will heal. That's similar to the old rules. When you get into the fuel model is where it gets interesting, is because if your units are not sufficiently fueled, we actually give you a combat penalty, but it's based on a sliding scale of how much fuel that you are deficient in. So if you have absolutely no oil for your troops, you get the full debuff.
Right.
And but if you have some, if you have half of the amount that you need, you only get half the debuff, etc.
Do sandstorms or droughts turn flat plains from plains into desert? I don't believe they
No, they do.
I believe that's set at the beginning. It just gets dry. It doesn't actually desertify.
Yeah, when they come through, they're gimping everything that's there at the time, and obviously then, as with storms, benefits can occur, but they're just there to cause damage in these wide open places. That's why you want to make sure to attempt to keep your places clear of drought-inducing conditions like chopping down all your forests.
And droughts don't improve a tile. Like if a drought sweeps through, that will not improve the tile.
Regular storms will improve tiles. Droughts are just little damage factories.
Well, droughts and tornadoes, right?
Yeah. Pillage my Suga, but will you? But the improvements can be really nice. Like the desert tiles that improved after that haboob swept through my desert area. Like the tiles improved on both food and production. Food is more common, but sometimes you'll get a production improvement on those tiles as well too, which is really helpful. And the volcanic eruptions add food as well on the tiles. Do they add production as well too occasionally? I think they do.
It's fertility.
It's just fertility.
Yes. Yep.
Right.
And we've been playing around with volcanoes quite a bit. And we've actually added it now just because we go back and forth with feedback a lot, obviously with Carl and his QA team. And the volcanoes, just the impression we got was, well, the risk reward is not quite where we wanted it to be yet. So Ed had just added his latest change was that they now, depending on the intensity slider that you have set for disaster intensity, can damage out to 2 tiles. So the radius on some of these bigger eruptions can actually be significant. So the reward possibilities are all there, but it's not so much as it was before with, I'm going to put my city 1 tile away from a volcano and just reap all the benefits, because now they have a little bit more reach, a little bit more risk and reward associated with them.
Oh, they definitely do. So a couple of other questions. Is Sean Bean ever going to get on the live stream? No, he is not. He's a very busy man that has better things to be on than this live stream, unfortunately. Can tiles hit by drought ever be recovered? Yes. Pillaged farms and pastures can be rebuilt. So that is something that you can bounce back from. There was another question that I saw earlier. Is Sean Bean doing the new voiceovers? Yes, he is.
Oh, we could
That was
not
fun
have
to
Sean
write.
Bean do the voiceover.
Yeah, it was fun to write the lines for him. So.
So Matzah Musa is a pretty interesting guy. The history behind him, I mean, it's, you know, the first time I ever heard about him, heard he was like the richest man in the world.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And
What real world impact did he have in
Yes.
terms of gold like you were
yeah,
playing?
I know you have some good anecdotes
Yeah,
there.
so he's most famous for making the Hajj, which is the pilgrimage to Mecca that devout Muslims make in the course of their lifetime, with an entourage of thousands. And Mali was, at that time, the largest producer of gold in the world. And they were going into an area of the world that was actually going through an economic collapse at the time. And he brought so much gold with him, he collapsed the economies of North Africa and Egypt on his way to the Hajj and coming back just by
showing up and making it rain.
showing up and buying stuff. You know, he's just, guy walks into a club and starts to make it rain. Is what it boils down to. It was crazy. And the funny part is, generations after he left, the citizens of Cairo were still telling stories about him, you know, coming through and the amount of gold he brought and the number of people he had. But the best part was, he honestly, you know, he was out to kind of promote the prestige of Mali, but he was also there to make the pilgrimage. I mean, he was a guy for whom, you know, wealth was an instrument. It wasn't a means to an end. I mean, and he came back, and you know, Mali had largely prospered while he was gone. His generals had conquered significant areas of neighboring kingdoms. They'd added Timbuktu to his empire, you know, and he brought back these scholars from the Islamic world, you know, jurists, scientists, academicians, and established these institutions for them in Mali. I mean, he's an amazing, amazing guy. And, you know, people are like, you know, he was the wealthiest man who ever lived, and his wealth is basically incalculable. And yeah, it's very definitely cool. So one of the fun things that I got to do in this time around on Gathering Storm was writing the character of Mansa Musa. And I wanted him to be your fun, rich friend. So when he's in the game, if Gilgerbo is like your buddy from the gym, then like this is the guy that you call up on Friday evening and you're like, hey, what are you doing? Because he's gonna be good.
And we did see Carl running some Mandicala cavalry across the landscape with his trader. These guys are really cool.
Yes.
I know they touched on it in the videos, but I just wanted to point out they actually get gold from kills. Every kill they make, of course, they get gold because they're really good at gold. But the other thing is, if they're within 4 tiles of any of your trade routes, so if you have them policing your territory, those trade routes are immune to plundering, which is also very powerful.
Yes.
For those of you that are used to running a trade route empire and constantly losing half of them every other turn because of, you know, things out in the wild, these guys are actually really impressive.
Random annoying barbarians that pop up later in the game and those types of things.
Or random annoying German declared wars.
There you go.
Yeah. So a couple of other questions. Are there other improvements to specialists in Gathering Storm?
Various. They did some updates to some of them to account for new rules. We didn't put any new ones in this round, but we're always making updates to all of those systems to accommodate the new rules, where we feel it's appropriate.
Okay.
Well, so one of the things we were talking about, I remember before, was we were kind of having a discussion about trade routes and where to send them. Because obviously, when you're playing Mali, is your international trade routes, your trade routes going to other civs and to other city-states, are they going to be the most lucrative gold-wise?
Right.
On the other hand, though, I mean, it's a very valid strategy for players to have internal trade routes, both to bolster their own cities, but also to build roads between them. And so you kind of find yourself getting creative with your routes. Like, you were telling me you were having, like, you know,
the western side of my empire was sending all their trade routes east, and the eastern side was sending it west, so that they would build those.
In hopes that they would path through your cities and things like that, so that you could still get your road network built. Right. But you didn't have to necessarily do that with just your own cities, because the amount of gold you get from foreign cities is just crazy, especially ones, like we said before, going in and out of desert cities.
Another question. Will Grievance reduce the amount of diplomatic favor you get per turn? no. That is just your argument, your beef with that particular leader. That's not affecting your ability to conduct diplomacy with the rest of the world, which is pretty good.
Yeah, so it's not this single value that gets increased or decreased. It's like there's two separate values that are taken into consideration in different situations.
And you're earning favor. You're not just gaining favor from another civilization like you are grievances. You have to acquire that favor from them. So you're going to be buying it from them. Otherwise, you're earning it all on your own.
Yeah, buying from them, trading it from them.
Yeah.
And somebody else has very astutely noticed that our Malian city set is using the Nubian buildings right now, and I believe you guys just changed it, so it's using the same, the Southern African building set.
Yeah,
the Congo.
The Congo set. Yep.
Okay.
It's a bug, not a feature.
It is. So what happens to this is a really specific question.
Wow.
What happens to a lake if tiles between it and the ocean are flooded?
If there happens to be a tile between a lake and the ocean that is susceptible to sea level rise,
Coastal rise.
yeah, it'll first become submerged, and eventually, if it continues and it becomes completely submerged, it'll just join up with the lake.
But on the other hand, floodplains though just still remain floodplains. They're just flooded land.
Yeah, that's different.
Yeah.
So there's a difference there between those two.
All right.
So I'm trying to get a sense of what kind of game Carl's going for, aside from his vast expanse of
there you
empire.
go. 23 gold per turn
He's
from that route.
Let's take a peek at actually his victory progress in world rankings, just to see what we're looking at here.
Ooh, you're in 5th place on culture. Oh, Mali also gets a really strong culture game because after a while you can just buy everybody else's great works from them because you're like, oh, you're in a war.
How would you know that, Pete?
Money solves a lot of problems.
Pete's exploiting wars of other nations.
Yeah. And
Dirty business.
it's also been my second easiest diplomatic victory beyond one civilization that we haven't talked about yet. Yeah, it's when you can buy everybody else's diplomatic favor, it's like, hey. So
did we have any idea that he played like that? That Pete played like that?
No.
Or is this just like a dark Pete thing?
Yeah, I think it was ever since he got the facial hair that he started playing in a very evil way.
So, talking about other things, for Matzah Musa's abilities, Sahel Merchants, where he receives a bonus trade route for every golden age. Is this bonus also received from heroic ages? Yes. Yep.
Golden Age and up.
Golden Age and up.
Golden Age and up.
Yep.
Yes. I know because I've just had.
I had to pause there for a second because I was just like, I've never thought about it that way.
Well, heroic technically doesn't have the word gold in it, so.
We have a couple of questions about
stream.
Cahokia. So, Carl, can you pull up Cahokia real quick from the city-state panel? This is one of the new city-states that we've added for Gathering Storm. This is another one of those trade city-states that's really fantastic, but their suzerain bonus is that you get to build the Cahokia Mounds, which are also pretty cool.
They are cool. See, so I used to live not too far from the Cahokia Mounds, and so I'd visited it many times. It's pretty cool and pretty amazing to think that stuff like that was built in North America at the time.
I know, by hand more or less, which is kind of incredible. How would flooded lakes affect the Huey-Tlautani Wonder? Badly, I presume.
That's a very, very, very specific question.
That is.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can answer that one.
I don't know that we can.
We need a screenshot.
Is the extra trade route that you get for the Golden Age permanent? The answer is yes. That is a permanent one. And so if you play Mali right, by the time you're up in the modern era, you're sitting on dozens of trade routes, and it's lovely. It's really lovely. So, are there any changes to the way passive religion spreads? I feel like with Mali, with you piping your trade routes out internationally, you do a lot of unintentional evangelization that way.
Yeah, we don't have any specific changes that were done to that. We mainly are piggybacking onto those existing systems with a lot of what Mali is able to do better.
But they seem like such a juggernaut.
They
Like,
are.
I don't know
It's
that.
the different types of stacking and adjacency that you
Right.
can do with Mali just really makes them a strong religion game.
And with the way the Seguba interacts with, holy sites and that, it's really fantastic. So the University of Sankore is a new wonder as well too. So this is another one that works well with Mali.
It's a great pairing.
Oh yeah,
in terms of what he's doing.
So that's one that's going to give you science from that city to your trading partner, and
There's all
to
kinds of
yourself,
bonuses.
so,
Actually,
yeah.
Carl, if you mouse over that real quick once more, this gives you a lot of interesting flexibility for when you build this. So if you build this in one of your big trading cities, trade routes coming in, trade routes going out, everybody is getting bonuses. And because of those bonuses, it actually encourages incoming trade routes from international partners as well, because they're getting additional bonuses from trading to that city. So it makes that city a lucrative trading target. This is actually one of the new wonders in the game, but that thing is a powerhouse, and it's pretty amazing.
It's no Petra, but it's still really
Still
good.
pretty darn cool.
I steamrollered Australia in my first game as Mali because they beat me to Petra. So I bought a whole
got
bunch
angry.
of units with faith and sat on them. It was really, really good.
See, that's a great example of not resetting your game. You just said, if I can't have it.
Yeah.
If I can't build it, I
I
will take
can't
it
build
by
it.
force.
Neither will the Australians. Is it true that Nazca is a city-state in Gathering Storm, and as suzerain, you can make the Nazca Alliance as a tile improvement?
That's a
Yes.
very specific and knowledgeable question.
Yes,
That is
and the answer is
exactly
yes.
correct.
You can build the Nazca
Yes.
Alliance. It is a faith-focused tile improvement that is really useful to build as well. Again, with Mali, that might not be something you'd beeline for as much because you're going to be getting a pretty good faith bonus from those desert tiles.
And ideally, you want to. There's other things that you can use them for. Yeah, you are getting a generous amount of faith if you're building your holy sites in the area.
Yeah. So how do Mali's non-desert cities fare with the same production deficits but without the desert bonuses? They're fine. By the time you're settling outside of your kind of city, your desert heart, you're overcoming all of your problems with
Yes.
money.
Yes.
So the World Congress has come back up again.
There are a couple challenges for you. I mean, gold is easy and plentiful, but there are some things that you still are going to have to build. So it's something that we touched on earlier. You're going to want to make sure to take advantage of those lumber mills, for example. Take advantage of other opportunities to get production. Build those production districts. You're going to want to really take advantage of that later.
Right, that's when, it's kind of like what I meant by the mindset. You have to get into a slightly different mindset with them to where you want to prioritize building things that you have to build.
So we
you
actually
can't buy them.
had a new one come up here for world religion.
Oh, this is a good one.
Yeah, depending on what civ you're playing, again, this is the positive or the negative you're going to land on this, and Carl is obviously coming down on the negative.
So, yeah.
And Carl does have a lot of extra favor to spend, so he might decide to bank this for later. He's got 111 now, or plow votes in now. It depends how much he really cares to get this passed. Every once in a while, I'll have a resolution come through where I'm like, I'm not going to engage with this this time. I'm really saving up my favor for later. That's really an option for you, but looks like he's going to sink in 3.
There are certain ones, though, that really help the Mali gameplay, and so you want to make sure you get those. So if you have a nice little pile of favor you can spend on them, it's...
Especially if you can cheese off Australia, who's just built Petra for you.
Right.
It's also, if you can't use diplomacy to mess up your enemies, why do anything? Will there be updates to the Earth map to reflect the addition of volcanoes and new resources added in Rise and Fall and Gathering Storm?
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah, that's something we like to do. We'll update all our static maps, and so you can enjoy that gameplay across the board.
Are there factors that affect what resolutions appear in the World Congress? As you get farther along in the game, the diplomatic victory motion will come up with increasing frequency. And then as the World Congress starts to meet more frequently, you're going to be voting on that more frequently. So as you get to the end of the game, there's this real kind of acceleration in the tempo of the diplomatic victory, which is kind of fun.
I do want to touch on special sessions a little bit. This is something that hasn't happened in Carl's game. It was yesterday, but obviously everything's that random roll. So if Carl is doing something slightly different, our special session won't come up. So we haven't had that opportunity. But one of the things that can happen is if you or an opponent or somebody else in the world gets a really damaging natural disaster, there's a threshold. If it reaches that threshold or surpasses it, you'll have a special session pop up on your radar. And this is something that you can call for yourself, like if you have something awful happen to you, or another civ can propose it, or you can propose it for somebody else. But you put a vote into this special session to call it. Everybody else can take this opportunity to pile their own in, and a special session of the World Congress is called for the following turn. This happens independent of how the World Congress is normally coming into play. But a request for aid is something that the Mali are very good at. Because when a request for aid happens, A, you have the chance of winning a diplomatic victory point, or gobs of favor, or other odds and ends. And B, the person on the receiving end of that gets to enjoy a lot of gold and benefits that way. So if I call one for myself, for example, I had a horrible flood, people died, stuff was damaged, and it passes, a scored competition will start where they're going to compete to send me the most gold or do a grant aid project. And whoever does the most is obviously going to get a diplomatic victory point, and second place gets diplomatic favor, and so on and so forth. As Mali, I want to take part in every one of those that I can for others, because I've got gold that I can throw away. The only key is that you have to remember to do it. The game I was playing yesterday, first turn came up, I plowed 200, made a deal with them. Here's a gift, 200 gold, and I got rid on the leaderboards, went up to first place the next turn. And then for some reason, I was probably one of the numerous Barbarossa invasions that occurred. I got distracted, and then before I knew it, you know,
War
20
has a tendency to do that, yeah.
20-some turns had gone by, it ended, somebody else had won, I was in the bottom 50%, I didn't get anything as a reward because I just wasn't paying attention and continuing to send gold to earn that diplomatic victory point. But if you are paying attention, those are a gold mine. I didn't mean to do that.
No,
those are
you totally did.
a powerful way of you getting ahead if you decide to play that diplomatic victory game, or you just want to use it to generate favor. Because you don't really have to spend to get in on it. You can just use a free vote, hope that it triggers off, and use your gold to actually win the top prizes.
Let us also say there's something incredibly satisfying about pouring generosity on your former enemies who can't take care of themselves. It's like, oh, you're so weak. It's really.
How smug of you, Pete.
You know, you gotta take what you can. I'm a sad, sad man who must acquire his happiness in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah.
So, does tundra recede as well as the climate warms? No, I believe tundra is fixed as well.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
But keep an eye out for that northern passage, because that's actually one of the interesting side effects of watching climate change happen.
So we've got a couple of questions about modding. Will modders be able to add new, for example, resolutions to the World Congress?
We will have more in a later session. There's a lot of things we want to talk about in terms of modding and what the possible things that are coming up. So yeah, we're definitely going to be talking more about that as well.
I mean, in general, we try to keep a data-driven approach to the design and, you know, to have so that people have the tools that they need to create things in the game. So that's a general practice.
Yep. But hopefully we'll have some great cool thumbs up stuff for our modding community that we'll be able to talk about.
Very good. All right.
When we were talking about ice receding and climate change,
Yeah.
unless you're playing, there's a lot of our players that love playing that first half of the game and never really engage or go too deep into the latter half of the game. It just depends on the type of player that you are. They love playing that medieval era. I'm typically one of those players where I really enjoy the engagement and the wide open spaces of the early game. But the climate change mechanics is what really drew me to the variability of what happens in the later game. And it was my Mali game that I was playing earlier that actually cued me into this, because they're the things that I'm not typically used to playing but now can affect you directly. It's not every game, it just sometimes happens. But I had my typical, I was on a roughly Africa-shaped continent. I had a good chunk of it. And Inca came down, Pachacuti, and founded a city down on the Horn. And then he founded 2 more cities down on the Horn.
Yeah.
And his first city had been there for a while and was pretty sizable, but my empire was already large at that point. So I started cranking out additional loyalty from those southern cities. And eventually, both those other 2 of his 3 southern cities flipped to free cities. And the one that had uranium that I was particularly focused on eventually flipped to me.
Nice.
Now, what I wasn't watching was that Pachacuti, as everybody knows in the real world, was generating 300% more CO2 than anybody else on the planet.
Yeah.
And so at first I wasn't paying attention to that, and I improved my uranium. I moved some tanks down there just in case he got itchy.
Yeah.
And I just kept on playing my game. And then the climate change phases started happening. And half of the territory of that city went submerged from that city that I got. And I went and checked the climate screen again, and he was just cranking out an unbelievable amount of CO2.
Coal-powered
And I know it wasn't
transformers.
on purpose, but it felt that way, just because I had gained these cities from them. And he's like, fine, it's going to go underwater now. I'll see you later. I don't need to be one with the environment. It was just it was a really interesting side tale that I had happen that story wasn't there before.
Right.
In typical earlier versions of Civ, the later eras tended to be a little bit more static, and war is the only thing that really changed the landscape in grand ways.
Right.
And this just added the whole other layer. I know it feels like it might be a small thing, but it's pretty dramatic when you actually start to run into it. And also, keep in mind, tanks do create CO2. So when I entered the Climate Accords competition, I was doing super well because I'm super green.
Yeah.
But the
except for
fourth
your
time
tanks.
that Barbarossa invaded me, I bought like
You got
6
tired
tanks.
of it. Yeah.
And then I kept them around, but we don't have a unit order to turn off the tanks, so they just sat there running, engines spewing out CO2, and I ended up coming in second place in the Climate Accords. It was very upsetting.
I remember when the Climate Accords came up in this last game I played, I had intentionally purchased tiles that were going to be oil tiles from a nearby neighbor to keep him from developing them, which I was really, really happy about. So are there, we've got a quick question about the other victory changes. Are there any changes to domination or religious victory?
Domination and religious victory are the victories that have stayed the same. We've made adjustments, obviously, to culture, to science victory, diplomatic victory is the new victory. Those two have stayed the same.
How much CO2 does a giant death robot produce? I've never actually asked it. It's
Wow.
They're not green. I
No,
assure
they're
you
not.
that.
They use uranium.
Nuclear.
Right, they're nuclear. That's a good question. I did not hook up the CO2 for the units. That was, I believe that was Matt. Matt would know.
There's
But-
a
I actually
firmware
think
cheat.
that one is clean. I mean, as clean as nuclear is, but yeah.
Yeah, that's if somebody's building giant death robots, climate change is the least of your concerns at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think you're too worried about
No.
that type of thing. Because, I mean, when they were asking about the domination victory, like, while the criteria for winning the domination victory hasn't really changed, in the last stream we did, we talked about the giant death robot and how it just can kind of stomp its way through the map. And it's fun when you get one or two of those online and you start sweeping the map. Because, if you're playing domination, that's exactly what you wanted to do. And so we wanted to kind of give a little something to the people that like to play that way. And that's how we ended up with the giant death robot.
Do nuclear weapons affect the climate?
That's actually something that Ed is going back and forth about, but across the board, because there's a lot of different things that could potentially do that, volcanoes, et cetera. So I would say that there's still, we're in our prime balancing time right now.
Yeah.
So that remains to be seen. I'm sure that's something we can talk about a little bit more later.
Right, because the units thing was a fairly recent addition too, because at first units were not creating CO2. So that was a balance change that we decided to incorporate.
Oh, here's an interesting question. Since Mali has the production penalty that they do for units and buildings, is there any way you can satisfy the heavy industry leader agenda? I think you can, because it's while you have a production penalty for building buildings and units, I believe the agenda just looks at like the raw production output of your civilization. So if you're building lots of industrial hubs and factories and what have you, you're going to have a high standard production output.
Your numbers are not going to be as high as others, but yeah, you can still, if you're planning on building wonders and then you're planning on building the districts, you're going to find other ways to get the production you're looking for.
You know what's another way to make friends without satisfying their agenda? Gifts of gold.
Gold, yes.
Gold.
But see, that's an interesting thing to think about too. Like, if you're playing Mali from a domination standpoint, you have to be careful before you go to war, or you got to make sure that your international trade routes are arranged in such a fashion that you do not lose those on going to war. So it's always a consideration that you can't kind of unilaterally fight everybody, because you're not going to get anywhere near as much gold as you would.
Well,
trading.
Mali makes friends very easily. Mali you generally are generating enough culture that you've got envoys coming out your nose, and so you can leverage city-states units. Not as easily as Hungary, but you can still buy your proxies as well.
It's just still something you need to consider.
Right. Is there a World Congress that focuses on barbarians? No.
No,
That's just
They
your
are
problem.
not included in the World
all
Congress.
you. They don't listen to the World Congress.
They don't. They don't care about World
No
Congress.
controlling legal authority.
It's like negotiating with the Dothraki.
And one other question: will the Terra map return? Are we making changes to the true Earth map?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought
Yep.
we had a similar question earlier.
Yep. I wish I'd been paying better attention to what Carl is doing. We had a lot of fun yesterday, going with the choices on that. So.
I will say, obviously, I'm sure the entire audience has been looking at it and screenshotting it, but Carl's been interacting with his trade routes so much. Just to go back and take a second look at the numbers he's putting up in terms of gold.
Oh, yeah.
As he's playing with that.
Yeah, but he only has 6 to 7 trade routes. And yeah, he's already making 303 gold per turn. And what level is this? This is Emperor? This is Emperor level difficulty. So this is higher than I usually play at.
Yeah.
Well, Carl normally puts up these numbers when he's playing Chieftain, which is what he does most of the time when he's playing. Carl's looking at me.
Carl's really happy
Okay,
about
that's where we need the camera to go to Carl.
Carl cam.
Just so you could see those daggers.
Right.
Yeah. Are there any changes to the religious system, additions, changes, anything like that? It's still...
We've made adjustments to some of the beliefs.
Yeah. I was
But
going to say some of them have
the
changed
religion
a little.
system as a whole is obviously working the way that it typically has worked, but we've made changes to different beliefs, some of the rule sets that are coming into play, things like that.
All right. Well, that is a good first look at what Mali does. It makes money. It spends money. You're basically, if you've been playing Civ in terms of thinking of things as production, you're now going to be thinking of them in terms of gold. The ability to purchase hundreds of units at once and suddenly flood a border, and maybe you see that invasion massing, and you can cause your enemy to think differently about it. It's a fun Civ. I haven't had as much fun playing a civilization as I have playing Mali this week. So definitely one you're going to want to have in your early playthrough.
A fun one.
Surprisingly, out of all the Civs, and I've played a lot of them, Mali is the one that I tend to go back to the most, just because it's such a it's a definite breath of fresh air in terms of changing the way that you typically would play, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, Dennis and Brian, thank you very much for coming on the stream today. We had one other piece of Civilization-related news happen this week. If you played Civilization 5, you're familiar with the voice of William Morgan Shepherd, who was the voice of the narrator in Civ 5. He passed away, and we were all very sorry to hear about that. Certainly for me, Civilization 5 has a kind of a special place in my heart. That was the first title I worked on when I came to Firaxis. And I will remember the first time I heard his voice kind of coming over the headphones as we were playing the game in development, and how cool that was for me. So we kind of wanted to leave you guys today with a little bit of a memorial for him. Thank you very much for tuning into our live stream this week on Mali. Remember, Civilization 6 Gathering Storm is coming out February 14th, 2019, just about a month from now. And we'll see you again for our next live stream. Have a good day.
Welcome back, my son. I've missed you. Have the men begun setting up the encampment?
Yes, Father.
Good. This is lush, fertile land. I think we can make a home here.
I agree. We will do well in this place.
Come, sit with me and listen. I've had a dream of our people's future. It was glorious. Glorious. I saw our people spreading throughout the land and across the oceans, expanding our kingdom and discovering new people and great riches in faraway lands. We built wondrous monuments honoring the gods, which reached up to brush the very fabric of the heavens. And then I saw a vast city with great buildings of stone, each more magnificent than the last. The streets were filled with our people, in numbers beyond counting. There was suffering as well, great and terrible, brought about by the torments of war. But we were strong, and we brought victory to our people. There my dream ended, and my story as well. For it has been revealed to me that it is your future I dreamed of, not mine. The fate of our people is now in your hands. I envy you, my boy. Your decisions will shape history itself. Go now, my son, with my blessing, and decide your future.